So today is Tuesday. Wednesday?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Another one you missed.
We've been sitting here.
So it's Wednesday, it's Yud Zayin, is it? Wednesday Yud Zayin of.
Yeah.
And the
Come on, don't overburden me so early in the morning. We are in the Mamar Kevod Malchuscha, which is the first Mamar Tafshin Yud Beis. We're on page Kuf Mem Dalid, just at the tail end of Ois Beis. Before we go on, I want to distribute this little piece of paper. It'll be easy for you to. That's for you. Kiva.
Just do an important text message.
There is in Kabbalah something which is referred to as Hashem's name made up of 72 letters. Okay? Generally known as the Shema Meferesh. There's a concept called Shema Meferesh. In other words, in Hashem's names you have all sorts of names. You have Elikim, Shakai, Yudke, Vovke, right? And so on and so forth. Generally speaking, Hashem's names refer to Hashem manifesting himself in a certain way and relating to that, to creation, to created beings, and so on and so forth. The name of Hashem, which is known as Shem HaMefoirash, I guess the explicit name, would mean basically Hashem's name, I'm putting it in simplistic terms, but Hashem's name as it basically relates mostly to himself. His name. The closest thing you get to him, so to speak. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is Hashem's name as it encapsulates all of creation. This name is basically, it's mentioned in the Zohar, okay? And it's the source is the episode in the Torah which describes what happened just before Kriyas Yamsuf, just before the splitting of the Red Sea. And there are 3 psukim in Parsha, in Chumash Shmos, in Parshas, where is it? Beshalach, where the pasuk describes what happened. So the Yidden were coming towards the Yamsuf, towards the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were following them, right? And there was a bit of a tricky situation there because on the front they had the sea, and behind them they had the Mitzrim, the Egyptians. So the pasuk, there are 3 psukim there. It says as follows: and the angel of God traveled, who usually was in front of the Jewish camp, traveled and went behind them. And so too the pillar of cloud traveled from in front of them to behind them, behind the Jews. Verse number 1. And he came between the camp of the Egyptians and the Jewish camp. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it illuminated the night. And it did not come up close to one another the entire night. Verse 2. Verse 3. Moshe raised his hand over the sea. And God led the sea all night with an eastern wind. And he transformed the sea into dry land, and the waters split. These are the 3 verses. Each one of these 3 verses has 72 letters. Now it's unique to find 3 psukim, one following the other, which have exactly 72 letters. Now, if you take, now it says in the Kabbalah, there's these 3 psukim, And these three psukim are connected Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Correspond to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In Spheris, in the divine attributes, Avraham is what? Chesed. Yitzchak is Gvura. Yaakov is Tiferes. Now, the way this is constructed to form Hashem's 72-letter name, it's basically a composite that's made up of all the three psukim combined. So letter 1 of Pasuk 1, letter 72 of Pasuk 2, letter 1 of Pasuk 3. So in other words, here, so why is it forward, reverse, and forward? Chesed denotes Hashem's hashpah, the way Hashem relates to the world in a revealed way. So it's straightforward. Gvura is Hashem as He reveals Himself to the world in a concealed way. So that is symbolized in the reverse. Tiferes, although Tiferes is a composite of both, it's made up of both. Nevertheless, the dominant sphera, the dominant attribute of Tiferes is Chesed. It's more a revealing force. Therefore, it's also read in the straightforward way. Now, you combine these three. If you look at the chart below, each one of these names, these small names, are of 3 letters. So it's letter 1 of Pasuk 1 is the Vav, Vayisa, right? Letter 2, you're looking at the chart, like the top right-hand box of the chart.
Who pulled this together?
This is in Kabbalah. This is from the Zohar.
You don't know who did it.
Sorry?
You don't know who did it.
Who did this?
Yeah.
Where did I get this from?
No, who
It's
did
from the Zohar.
mathematics?
It's in the Zohar.
Yeah.
On Pasha Shmos. I'm saying Chumash Shmos. So, the first Vav is the Vav of Vayisa, the first pasuk. The Hey is the last letter of the second pasuk, and the next Vav is the Vav of the first Vav of the third pasuk. So on and so forth. You look at the second one, right? The Yud is the second letter of the first pasuk. The Lamed is the second to the last letter of the second pasuk, and the Yud is the second letter of the third pasuk, and so on and so forth. This is Hashem's name of 72 letters. Shem ben Ayin Beis Asius. Okay? What does that so again, what does it denote? It denotes the totality of Hashem's relationship with everything else. Because all of that is basically expressed through Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. These 3 dominant spheres. What does that have to do with what we're learning in our Maimer? We are learning here about what happens on Rosh Hashanah. We learned in this Maimer, up until now, that Hashem created the world, and He wanted to create the world in a way which, on the one hand, you have created beings that are separate of Hashem, right? So that Hashem's ultimate purpose of creation could be carried out in that of making a dwelling place for Hashem in a realm, in a low realm, in the lowest realm. So for that purpose you need what? You need created beings, and you need realms that are, so to speak, outside of Him. Nifrodim, separate, right? But at the same time, lend themselves to become permeated by godliness and lifted by godliness. So you need Eilamis and Nivroim, Nifrodim, separate, but at the other hand, that lend themselves to be refined and lifted through, and we'll soon see how that is accomplished, that lifting. But in order for that to take place, what did you need? So you needed a device, which on the one hand causes there to be nifrodim, separate entities. That's known as gvuras, right? We spoke about gvura, which is the power to withhold God's revelation. But if it would be gvura alone, the withholding force alone, that would be responsible for the creation of the nifrodim, of those beings and realms that are separate, you would have entities that are completely separate and would not lend themselves to be lifted and to be reconnected, as it were, to Hashem. That's why it needs to have what? Also, it has to be gvuras memutokes, sweetened strictnesses. sweetened gvura, sweetened withholding force, which means to say a withholding force which is infused with chesed, with revealing. So on the one hand, you have the gvura, which causes there to be nefradim separate. At the same time, you have what? The elements of chesed within the gvura, which ultimately are responsible for those that are separate to be able to be reconnected and lifted to God and to Kedusha. Right? That was the first part of the Maimon. Now, then the Rebbe went in, and as I explained in the previous room, this is broadly the first 4 chapters of the Maimon are broadly, overwhelmingly, a direct quote from a Maimon of the Alter Rebbe, as transcribed by the Pinchas Reizes, as we spoke in the previous Shiurim. So in the second Ois, he brings from the Zohar the first opening statement of the Zohar, which says, "Bereish hurmanusa the Malka Gol of Glifu b'Hiru Law." In the beginning of the king's desire, the king's permission, as it were, the king's desire, the king's revelation to the world, meaning Hashem's revelation at the point of creation. Gol of Glifu, he carved out a carving b'Hiru Law in the celestial purity, which is basically the idea of the tzimtzum, the contraction in the Ein Sof, which took place in God's infinite light at the point of creation, right? For the purpose of creation. And the point being that initially all of this that we just described was by God's initiative, Hashem's initiative. That Hashem initiated the relationship with the world. Hashem initiated creation. Hashem initiated the tzimtzum. Hashem initiated the following revelations. But from the point of creation and on, from the point of when man was created and on, now it all depends on man's serving Hashem. To reawaken, as it were, or to awaken God and godliness, to want to communicate and to have a relationship with the world. Right? And then he went on to explain, how does that happen? The relationship between creation and created beings is so distant, so vastly and infinitely distant from Hashem. How could, and he said, Kemoshel Azvuv, he quoted, for example, he brought an example of a fly that flies around in a house. What is the relationship between the fly and the human being sitting in the house? Almost nil. Very, very distant. And our distance from Hashem is even greater than what? The distance between a fly and a human being. So how do we have the power to draw down this tremendous revelation of godliness in order for the world to continue to exist and so on and so forth? So there needs to be an awakening from below to draw down Hashem's desire and pleasure in Avodas HaAdam, in man's service of Hashem. Right? And Hashem created the circumstances through Hashem's desire that a human being's Avodas Hashem, serving of Hashem, should have an effect. That causes that relationship. Now what happens? This happens on a daily basis. This happens on a regular basis through our Torah and mitzvahs and so on and so forth. Serving Hashem, we draw down godliness into the world. What happens on Rosh Hashanah? This is a Mamar of Rosh Hashanah. What happens on Rosh Hashanah? On Rosh Hashanah, everything in creation reverts back to its original state. We basically go back to the point of the beginning of creation. Right? Now, during the year, the world exists. Creation exists. Of course, the creative process is constant, but we don't have to draw it all back down from its original source, as it were. The relationship between man and God is set, and through Avodas Hashem, through the performance of Torah mitzvahs, we continue to draw down additional godliness into the world. On Rosh Hashanah, what happens is, we have to sort of convince Hashem to create the world anew. In 5,773 years ago, when Hashem first created the world, He did it on His own initiative. But from that point on, whenever it reverts back to as it was at the point of creation, or just before creation, which is when? On Rosh Hashanah, we have to now cause Hashem to desire to recreate the world again, as it were. Right? How do we accomplish that? Through the service of Hashem that we perform when? On Rosh Hashanah. And the Rebbe quoted that what do we do on Rosh Hashanah? We say verses of Malchus. One of the things we do is we say verses of kingdom. What is this idea of saying verses of kingdom? So we'll start from there. Page Kuf Mem Daled. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 lines from the top. Teres Menachem Sefer Mamorim Tafshin Yud Aleph Tafshin Yud Beis, page Kuf Mem Daled. 5 lines from the top. V'zeu Imre Lefanei Malchus. This is the idea of that the Talmud says, say before me. The Talmud says that Hashem says, recite before me, utter before me Malchus, verses of kingdom, which is the idea of what? Praising Hashem and causing and as it were, articulating before him the greatness of him being a king over the world. But Imru is from the expression of saying, but Imru is also from the expression of praising. There's a pasuk in Parshas Kisavai which says, "V'havaya v'Hashem ha'emircha hayom liyis leila am sgula," and Hashem has selected you this day to be His treasured people. So ha'emircha is from the same root as Imru, as saying, selected, meaning to say, Hashem has chosen to be proud with you. So ha'emircha, Imru also has the connotation of what? Of praising. Right? So Imru Lefanei Malchus means in the context of, obviously this is a play on the word, as it were, or the deeper meaning of the word Imru. Losh Nispire is an expression of praise. It's similar to the idea of bringing an object before the king, and this object is praised before the king in order to draw down to the king that he should have pleasure from this object. So the idea of saying Malchus, ideas, psukim, verses of Malchus, of kingdom before Hashem, means to praise before Hashem the idea of Hashem being a king over the world. And through that causing him to desire to recreate the world, to draw down all the hashpahs and all the revelations and manifestations for the world to be created anew. Now in the text of the davening of Rosh Hashanah, of the Shemona Esrei of Rosh Hashanah, we also say, just before Ata Kodesh, we say the opening brachas, then we go into the Ubechein. Ubechein ten Pachtacho, Ubechein ten Koved, right, and so on and so forth. There are 3. Okay, there are different nuschos, different versions of the nusach, whether there are 3 Ubecheins or 4 Ubecheins. I believe in our nusach there are 4. Is that right? I believe in our nusach there are 4. But it's basically set out in a way where there are 3 plus 1, as it were. Okay, some of the nuschos have them. Some of the versions have them. Have one of the ubecheins or the leder vader within the context of another part of the davening. But basically, there are 3 ubecheins plus 1. Generally, we talk about 3 ubecheins. We'll see in a minute what that is. But then we say after the ubechein, we say leder vader hamlichu lakel. From generation to generation, make God the king. Why? Because he on his own is very high and very holy, very exalted and very holy, very removed. What is the deeper meaning of this? So it says again in Kabbalah Chassidus, doir v'doir is 2 levels. There are different interpretations which 2 levels it refers to. But one interpretation is it refers to Zoh and Malchus. Another interpretation is it refers to Tiferes and Malchus. Another interpretation is that it refers to Bina and Malchus. But basically what it means, L'doir v'doir amlichu lakel, from generation to generation, make the king, make God king. It means to say, draw Hashem into Bina and draw Hashem into Malchus. What is Malchus? The attribute of Malchus? The attribute of Malchus is the Sphira, the attribute responsible for creation, through which Hashem creates the worlds, through which Hashem ultimately manifests himself and has his relationship with all the worlds, right? Every level of Malchus in its realm, whether it's Malchus of Bria, Malchus of Atzilus, or even higher. Malchus is like we learned in the first Maimer of Basi Legani, is the idea of Shechina. And Shechina is in each realm, it's contextual, right, in each realm, but Shechina is the idea basically of drawing down godliness down below into the lower realm. Right? So that's the idea of l'doir v'doir amlichu lakel, drawing down Hashem and godliness from the very highest levels through the spheres until we ultimately come to Malchus, so that Hashem can have the relationship with the world. Why do we need to do that? Ki hu levad emarim v'kadosh. Because he on his own is totally removed. And we need to draw him down to have the relationship with the world. Because Hashem is so greatly removed from the world and innately removed, and because when Rosh Hashanah comes anew, from the point that Hashem created the world, the relationship between Hashem and worlds is dependent on man's service of Hashem. Therefore, we have to draw down that Hashem should have. We have to create this pleasure, as it were, that Hashem should have. He should have pleasure from having a relationship with the world, with worlds and with created beings. That's what we have to accomplish on Rosh Hashanah. This is the idea of the three ubechains that we say in davening, and as it says also in Kabbalah and Chassidus, that bechain, again, the numerical value of bechain is 72. Beis is 2, Chaf is 20, Nun is 50. That's 72. So going back to Hashem's name of 72 letters, as mentioned before, Eddie, you just missed an interesting shir about Shemayim Beis, but you can listen to it and we'll give you a chart before you go. So bechain is the idea of 72, Hashem's 72 letter name, 72 letters, name of 72 letters. And as mentioned before, it's 3 times 72 in these 3 psukim. Keneged Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, right? Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Hashem's name of 72 letters basically encompasses the totality of the fusion and combination of the spheres. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes combined. So that's why on Rosh Hashanah we say Ubechein 3 times, which denotes the idea of what? Drawing down godliness from the very highest levels through the spheres, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, in a combined way, for the purpose of having the relationship with the worlds. Hakel Kamal, all as mentioned before. The question is, why do we have a fourth of Bechain? So the Rebbe explains in a Maimer, based I think on Ayin Beis, that the fourth of Bechain is Tshuva. There's Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, I guess which is Torah, Aved, and Milz Chasadim also. Learning Torah, serving Hashem, and loving kindness, right? Is Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. But that's in the normal way. But then you have Aved, Sabali, Tshuva, if, God forbid, a person hasn't done what he needs to do in these 3 directions of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Torah, Aved, and Milz Chasadim, there's Tshuva, which reaches even beyond Hashem's name of 72 letters. It reaches Hashem's very essence. But the bottom line is, the point of all of this is basically the idea that on Rosh Hashanah we have to draw down godliness from the very, very highest levels. Again, just like it was from at the point of creation, and from the point of creation and on, that process depends on our avodah and our serving Hashem through Imru the Malchus, through praising Hashem in this idea of kingdom and Hashem being a king, right? And through that, Hashem reconnects to the world. Then in the next chapter, he goes into he asks a very powerful question. Since we say that on Rosh Hashanah everything reverts to its original state, and we have to draw it down again, so at that point, and on the night of Rosh Hashanah, when Rosh Hashanah comes in, when everything reverts to its original state, how does the world exist? It seems we go back to before creation. So the world should stop existing and then come back into existence. But that doesn't happen, right? Why not? And that we're going to address in Mr. Shem tomorrow, starting from the next chapter and on.